This is the IoT for All Media Network. Hello, friends in IoT. Welcome to Let's Connect, the newest podcast in the IoT for All Media Network. I am Ken Briota, Editorial Director for IoT for All, and your host. If you enjoy this episode, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, and comment on all your favorite podcasting platforms. And to keep up with all the IoT insights you need, visit iotforall.com. Before we get into our episode, the IoT market will surpass $1 trillion in the next few years. Is your business ready to capitalize on this new and growing trend? Use Leverage's powerful IoT solutions development platform to efficiently create turnkey IoT products that you can white label and resell under your own brand. Help your customers increase operational efficiency, improve customer experience, or even unlock new revenue streams with IoT. To learn more, go to iotchangeseverything.com. That's iotchangeseverything.com. Now, let's connect. Today's guest, we are very happy to have Stuart Mitchell, the Chief Evangelist and Head of Product at ZARIOT. And we're going to talk a little bit about security today. So don't be scared. We're here and you're safe. Stuart, welcome to the show.
Oh, hi, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure's entirely mine. Thank you for being my guest. In case folks aren't familiar with you, Stuart, personally, or with ZARIOT in general, can you give us a little bit of your background and how ZARIOT fits into IoT and sort of where folks might intersect with you?
Sure. I mean, I've been working in mobile technology for nearly 20 years now, across a number of different spaces, messaging. I've been working in data transport. But more recently, I've been working in the IoT space, looking at how we can deliver secure IoT connectivity to the market. Cellular is a wonderful technology to be used for IoT. It has global access, global reach. It's very easy to get hold of devices that can connect to it. But we think there's a space, a hole that needs to be plugged. Security is a concern within cellular networks, and that's what we're here to do at ZARIOT, is to fix that hole and bring secure SIMs to market for mission-critical applications.
So before we get into the actual discussion, I would very much like to sort of start very high level and talk about security in general and IoT connectivity security, because a lot of companies, you might be aware, talk about being secure and talk about IoT security and secure networks and all sorts of things. Whereas I'm generally of the opinion that there's no such thing as sort of a secure network of security. There's just sort of doing your best to keep the Visigoths from getting over the wall, and being sort of constantly in a state of improvement. Is that sort of a good common definition of security so for us to operate on as we move forward, or do you have a different one that you like?
No, I think that works for me. As you say, security is an ever-changing activity that is not something you can just follow a list, hit some points, tick the box, and it's done. You need to be constantly aware as networks evolve and change, as technologies evolve and change. New threats and vulnerabilities become apparent all the time. I think one of the challenges with IoT is that it's not a single thing end to end. So you have, manufacturers of devices, sensors, routers, gateways that need some kind of connectivity to bring that data back to, a cloud-based platform, typically for storage and analytics. And there's any number of links in the chain in the middle, whether it's edge routers, edge processing. There could be handoff from technology like LoRa to cellular. There's any number of different points on the way through the chain that could actually be used as an attack vector for any nefarious purposes to try and get into the ecosystem. So one of the challenges I think, particularly with IoT, is the complexity, I guess, of the solution, and the fact that we've got billions of devices, often not being looked at, unmanned, unknown, and these attacks are simply invisible.
Hmm. I've argued for years that a lot of the uh, brunt of the responsibility for the vulnerability of the IoT is to be borne by sort of the OEMs creating the devices that are just sort of open. That has
Mhm.
gotten better over the years, I think, but for a long time, it was just basically sign into this network anytime you want kind of world. And that's probably, a problem for basically everyone involved. Um, and I don't want to put the cart before the horse too much, but I'm going to anyway. Isn't sort of end to end encryption and anonymization of the data the available solution to that sort of multifaceted Hydra security problem? Like, I feel like the only way to deal with that is to assume a breach and then sort of try to mitigate that by making sure that the data is not particularly useful if you pull it from the middle. You need all of it to make sense of it.
That certainly makes sense for something like a data interception attack. What we see in IoT, particularly on the cellular side, is that the devices that are deployed in the field are pretty dumb. They don't have, VPN capability, so they have no ability of actually encrypting their data at the point of collection. So that's often sent in plain information through to the mobile operator. Nearly every single cellular IoT provider that you talk to will offer some kind of a VPN solution to carry your data over the public internet. And that's great. That's secure. At that point, as you say, it is scrambled and jumbled so that it's not readable to anyone. But one of the challenges, I guess the challenge is not just interception, right? It's not just the reading of data. What happens if that data is completely stopped through some kind of denial of service attack, for example? If you've got a mission critical IoT device that you need to receive the data from, whether it's, a shipment of COVID vaccine that you want to make sure is tracked securely and not hijacked en route, or it's a connected car that's reliant upon sending service information, you need to make sure that that device remains available and remains connected to the network. So, protecting the data from interception is one thing, but ensuring it's always available and protected from things like denial of service is another thing entirely.
And you've segued beautifully into our main topic here. So thank you for doing my job for me, Stuart. I appreciate that. Let's talk about some of the real vulnerabilities inherent in IoT right now. The sort of the things that keep you and your ilk up at night that some of the rest of us might not even be aware are things that we should be addressing or ameliorating. I know you've been looking into this a lot lately, and I'd like you to please share the terror.
Sure. And remember, everyone, don't have nightmares. The vulnerabilities were first interjected when the mobile operators started connecting to each other. They were using a protocol called SS7. SS7 is decades old, originally specified in the 70s, and really wasn't intended to be used for handling data. It was originally intended for call setup and call teardown. And of course, it's been extended over the years to incorporate things like SMS and setup of data sessions. And really, that's the starting point. So as we moved on to 4G, from 3G, which was SS7 based, 4G introduced another protocol called Diameter. Diameter also has some vulnerabilities. And moving forward, there's been other protocols laid on top, whether it's SIP that does some multimedia type applications. There's GTP, where the data transport is actually held. And then moving on to 5G, there's more protocols still, which are beginning to shut down some of the vulnerabilities. But one of the problems that we have is that all of these technologies are layered on top of each other. So SMS, for example, regular text messaging, is still using some protocols that were specified nearly 50 years ago. In terms of what is possible to do with these, the vulnerabilities that can be exposed by these protocols, it really kind of fall into four main camps. So the first one I've already kind of alluded to, which was denial of service. If you can identify a device through an unprotected mobile network on a signaling channel, you can actually instruct that that device is taken off the network. Complete denial of service, very, very hard to detect by the mobile operator, and moreover, very, very hard to actually reverse. It can be reversed, but you need to know it's happened. Typically, if a device just disappears offline for whatever reason, people will suspect it's a battery issue, maybe it's a coverage issue, or something else. So, this is something that is really difficult to detect and has catastrophic consequences, as I mentioned earlier. Just taking a device offline can cause a major problem.
So, sorry, I just want to jump in there for a second because I haven't said anything in a while, and I don't want folks to forget. The idea of sort of denial of service is, I think, familiar to most people in internet context, sort of broad public internet context. Everybody thinks of a botnet sort of all attacking some site. But this can be as small as one sort of gateway router being turned off. And so now some critical infrastructure monitor doesn't know that there's something nefarious happening upstream of it.
Correct.
Is that sort of the thing you're talking about here?
Absolutely right. I mean, it's a random type attack. You need to a certain amount of guesswork would have to go into play if I decided I particularly wanted to knock your, I don't know, cellular connected pacemaker offline, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But typically, people who play with this stuff don't really care. They're just there to make trouble, and they'll hit anything. It could be a cell phone. It could be, as I say, a connected car, a connected shipment. It could be a packet that's en route somewhere. Anything that's connected via cellular is potentially at risk.
Is it fair to say that this kind of attack is more often mischievous than not? Like, it's not necessarily a targeted or, I hate to call it business criminal, but it is attack.
This kind of denial of service is, but there are industry experts out there at the moment talking about the fact that China has used the Caribbean networks to try and breach the US networks, over signaling. If you want to go looking for that on the internet, you can find it. And similar stories are coming through about the Channel Island operators being used to attack the UK and the US as well. So, as I say, the starting point, very simply, it can be done randomly. But when espionage moves to a corporate scale or a global scale, then, the stakes are much, much higher.
Of course.
There've been some very, very well publicized attacks of various high value individuals. I don't know if you remember, there was a while ago that Angela Merkel's BlackBerry, for example, was intercepted. Mm-hmm. So, these vulnerabilities are out there and they can be used.
I was very surprised at how many Pidgeys she'd caught. I thought that she should spend less time on Pokemon Go.
There you go.
So what's the next? You said there were 4 main types. Let's move on to the next one.
Yep. So the next one would be location snooping, if you like. The ability of actually getting some kind of idea of the location of an asset or a connected device. Now, that would typically be done down to the cell tower level. It's not using the GPS or anything of that nature. But if you can identify, if you know the device you're looking for, and you're able to interrogate the network to say, tell me where that is, you should be able to identify which cell tower it's currently connected to. And that's the kind of information that sometimes, depending on the IoT deployment, you wouldn't necessarily want people to know. If you've got a particular shipment, for example, that was, or a high net worth individual who's using a personnel tracker, maybe you wouldn't want the whole of the world to know that they happen to be dropping into Beijing or coming back to the UK, or they happen to be in North Carolina when the world thinks they're in California. So location snooping is another one, and again, no VPN.
This seems like sort of an automatic bad guy. Like, it just this feels like there's no sort of accidental way to do this, if that makes sense. I think this just feels like if you're in this camp, if you're doing location snooping, you're trying to find out either sensitive information or some sort of nefarious activity, I guess,
Yeah.
be it corporate or state or just criminal.
Or just gossip, right?
Sure. Wait a minute.
Um,
Are you throwing shade at media? Because I don't know if I can allow that over here.
I was thinking more about it, the NBA MVP signing for a new team, but you can look at it any which way you like, I guess.
Oh no, it sounds like I have a guilty conscience.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, much like the denial of service, no amount of data encryption actually protects you from that, right?
Yeah, it's just, did you ping the tower, right?
Right, correct. Obviously, mobile networks always know where you are because that's how they know how to direct the data or the calls or the SMS to your device. But that information is not made public for obvious reasons. But if that could be compromised and made public, then, as you say, it could be used for all kinds of reasons.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So now that we're really worried, let's get more worried. What's next?
Next is good old-fashioned interception of both data and SMS traffic. It's entirely possible. If you don't happen to have a VPN connection in place, then it's possible for your data to be snooped, intercepted, and potentially could be changed en route, right? So I don't know, if you're capturing a device that's sending tracking information and you decide you're going to capture it and continue to report that particular shipment of whatever it is still en route to its destination when actually you've intercepted it and taken it off in a different direction, that's certainly going to throw the law enforcement teams off the track. And you won't be discovered until a long way. You're over the hills and far away with that shipment. So, like I say, data and SMS interception. SMS is still very widely used by a number of applications for configuration setup, for example. And again, a different sort of denial of service can actually be done by intercepting SMS configuration messages, changing a few parameters, and knocking a device offline, such that it's going to be very difficult for the original sender to understand what's happened.
Yeah, and as you said before, something like a carefully temperature monitored shipment of COVID vaccine would be vulnerable to this kind of thing, assuming that maybe that's how the monitors are getting their reports on temperature via SMS or some other cellular mechanism.
Absolutely right. I mean, it's in the interest of the shipping company that the shipment is delivered safely, has been delivered, being stored at the right temperature. If something goes wrong down the track, and they actually have the ability of intercepting those messages and making sure that it's always being reported as being kept safe, the whole integrity of the shipment can be at risk. So, this stuff is really important.
So I'm going to make you talk about solutions here, but not yet, because we have one more to go. And
one more to go.
And I need to hear about this last one, because I can only assume it's like getting mugged in like a dark alleyway or something, because that's where we're going.
I mean, the last one's just about the money. It's only about the money. Basically, the ability of manipulating the usage bills. So, you can report a transaction as being, instead of being many, many gigabytes of data, you could report it as being a few megabytes. So the ability of actually changing the subscriber records, if you like, either inflating or deflating your bills. Mm-hmm. Like I say, this one's just about the money.
So, I mean, asking for a friend, how exactly do you do that?
I have no idea.
Okay. Jokes aside, obviously all four of these types of security vulnerabilities that you've talked about can mean big problems for any enterprise, any business, any supply chain, anyone leveraging IoT, especially on cellular or multi-connectivity networks, it seems like. So about all of my listeners currently are probably getting quite worried, because maybe they knew about some of these and we're doing some amelioration methods there, but maybe not others. What do we do? I mean, all of these seem like the sort of worst kind of security scenario, where it's a very simple to explain and understand problem, which usually means it's a very complex thing to fix.
Well, the mobile industry are well aware of this, right? There have been some very highly publicized cases, and there's been a lot of talk at things like the GSM Association about what can be done to resolve these issues. And there are a number of suppliers in the chain. ZARIOT is actually part of the Cellsys Group, and Cellsys provide one too, offer signaling firewalls that basically ensure the mobile operators themselves are protected from these attacks, no matter where they come from. And, widely through the industry, the understanding of these threats and the mitigation of these threats is done by the mobile networks themselves at the network layer. Unfortunately, what we find, when we've done a survey about a month or so back, 75% of the operators who responded to our survey reported they actually had incomplete protection in place. So, I talked about 5 protocols and 4 types of threat. You need to make sure that they're all covered because any vulnerability will probably be found. So, I mean, in short, the answer to the problem is to have a properly configured and, to an earlier point, fully ongoing managed signaling firewall in place on the network, protecting all of the different protocols from SS7, diameter, GTP, SIP, and the new 5G protocol, which is HTTP2.
Well, that's solved then. Thank you, Stuart. What is the scope of the problem? I mean, if it's as simple as work with your MVNO or other connectivity provider to make sure that you've got this signaling firewall in place, what is the scope of how many people have not done that? How vulnerable are these network connections in the current marketplace?
Well, the mobile network providers themselves don't talk about this stuff. So if you went to the Verizon website or the Vodafone website or maybe the Movistar website, none of them are going to say front and center, and hey, we have a signaling firewall in place. Because, it doesn't really behoove them to talk about these vulnerabilities and explain they're available because, hey, who knows what's going to happen. So this stuff is kind of kept a little bit under wraps. We know, again, from the work that we've done, that around 62% of operators think they probably aren't protecting their networks correctly. And we also know that more than 10% of lost are seeing up to above 5 service disruptions every month. So, the attacks are happening. The signaling firewalls are in place. Mobile operators are not always sure that they are in place. And that's why really we put together ZARIOT, because we thought, hey, we understand signaling. We understand what it means to manage and operate a firewall. If we can operate those and look after those on the mobile networks that we offer through our SIM cards, that means that we can ensure that we're offering fully protected SIM cards. So that's our approach to the problem.
And I've heard this argument before, sort of deal with it at the SIM level, be it a physical SIM or an eSIM, sort of make sure that SIM can't transfer any data that isn't on the right kind of firewalled network or whatever. And that makes logical sense to me, at least for cellular applications, although I presume that this would not necessarily be applicable to non-cellular transfer of wireless transfer of data. So you'd sort of have to have a choke point where cellular is made use of, or one of these secure SIMs is made use of in order to make sure that you're protected there. Yeah.
Absolutely right. I mean, there's many protocols out there, as you know, LoRaWAN, Zigbee, Sigfox. The list goes on and on. Low power Bluetooth. I could go on forever, but cellular is the world that we know. Cellular is the perfect technology for any number of applications. It's not perfect for everything, but a lot of technologies eventually need to get that data back to some kind of public cloud, some kind of internet-based analytics. So oftentimes cellular is used as a final point of backhaul. We just want to make sure it's protected.
Yeah, that makes sense. We're getting near the end of our time, unfortunately, Stuart. We're having a lot of fun here, terrifying the world at large. But before I let you go, I sort of want to give you the floor. If there's something we haven't talked about yet that's important you think our listeners keep in mind as they're sort of planning their own connectivity in their IoT implementations, or as they silently rock themselves back and forth in their showers? What should they keep in mind?
I think, at ZARIOT, we are passionate about security, and we don't just look at cybersecurity within the space of mobile networks and the world of cellular. So looking out across the industry, there's a strong push at the moment towards this concept of zero trust. And zero trust is a fascinating approach really to security, which is, rather than trying to identify and mitigate the threats, just shut everything down unless you needed to have it open, and only open to things that you trust. And that's the kind of philosophy that we want to bring actually to our whole ZARIOT operation, because when you begin to look on a 360 basis around any kind of IoT deployment, it's really interesting to think of it, like I say, with the model flipped. Rather than what do I need to protect myself against, it's what do I need this device to do, and therefore what should I allow it to do, and who should I allow it to speak to? So that's what we're going to be working on over the coming months and probably a year or so, is how can we really turn ZARIOT into a fully zero trust based IoT SIM card solution?
I really want to continue that conversation because, a lot of reasons. I think it's a really interesting idea that is, again, deceptively simple, but actually very complex in terms of execution and practical application. But also because I once ran a IoT security symposium. This was about, 5 or 6 years ago, where over the course of 3 days at an event, we had session after session, discussion after discussion about what IoT security was and what it needed to be. And in the end, my whole goal in that symposium was to come up with what is the first step? What is the one thing that in this venue we can agree on that every IoT security situation needs to have? And the first thing was sort of identity management, network fidelity. That was the thing we sort of settled on. All the arguments came back to, if you don't start there and know what's on the network and what it's doing and that it's doing the thing that it should be doing, you're nowhere. And it seems like the way you describe zero trust, that's the sort of natural evolution of that idea, in that once you know what's on your network and that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, you don't let anything else in there. You don't let anything do what it's not supposed to be doing. You don't let anything that isn't supposed to be there be trusted to be there. And it seems like that's sort of a natural evolution of this sort of identity management strategy.
Absolutely right. If you know that your SIM card is in a soil sensor, and all that soil sensor needs to do is produce data back to the platform to tell, some kind of agricultural application exactly what the current status of the soil is. Why does it have complete full internet access?
Right.
Why is that SIM card also able to access YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or any of those platforms? Why does it have full internet access when it just needs to have a single point that it can talk to? Shut everything else out. Only trust one thing, that application, and only that application should be able to reach it, and it should only be able to reach that application.
I absolutely want to follow the Twitter account of a soil sample. I want to know what it's tweeting, and I want to know right now. So out there, listeners, if you know of the Twitter account of that specific soil sensor, you've got to send it to me. I'm at Ken Briota. Stuart, thank you so much for being my guest and sort of talking to us about security and about what ZARIOT's been working on. I really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. You can always find out more at ZARIOT.com.
Of course, and you'll find that link in the show notes for you folks out there listening. Thank you again to Stuart Mitchell for being my guest, and to all of you out there for listening. You can, of course, please feel free to rate, review, like, subscribe, do all the various podcasting type things that help us feed the algorithm and bring our IoT stories to more of you. If you'd like to become a partner of the Let's Connect podcast as a sponsor, you can find the information for that in the show notes. And of course, please make sure that you check out ZARIOT as you do that. ZARIOT isn't a sponsor, but I've used up a lot of Stuart's time, so it's only fair. Finally, make sure that you share this episode with your friends and, send it out on the various social medias. We would love for you to do that and leave us a comment telling me what you thought, because that actually has bearing upon what I might do in the future. I read all the comments and I look forward to hearing from you. Once again, Stuart Mitchell of ZARIOT, thank you so much for being my guest today. It has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks again to all of you listening out there. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and if you have, please make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our episodes. We post every week, and I hope you'll leave us a rating, review, and comment on your favorite podcasting platform. If you'd like to suggest a guest, please click on the link in the description. And we also have a great sister podcast on our network called the IoT for All podcast, so make sure you check that out.
Hey Ken, let me jump in real quick and introduce your audience to another awesome show on the IoT for All Media Network, the show that started it all, the IoT for All podcast, where I bring on experts from around the world to showcase successful digital transformation across industries. We talk about use cases and IoT solutions available in the market and provide an opportunity for those companies to share advice to help the world better understand and adopt IoT. So if you're out there listening and haven't checked it out, be sure to go check out the IoT for All podcast, available everywhere.
Thank you, Ryan. Now get back to your show. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Let's Connect. I've been Ken Briota, Editorial Director of IoT for All, and your host. Our music is Sneaking on September by Otis McDonald. And this has been a production of the IoT for All Media Network. Take care of yourself. You are listening to the IoT for All Media Network.